Dolores Mayfield sat alone in the dimming light, her hands trembling as they clutched a weathered photo album. The world outside had changed, but inside, everything was the same. A silent prison of memories she couldn't escape. For years, she had been the one who gave, who sacrificed, who loved unconditionally. But now, she was left with nothing but the bitter sting of betrayal. Her son, Jason, had decided she was a burden. He placed her in a nursing home, a place where her dignity was stripped away, and her voice was lost in the shuffle of the forgotten. But Dolores wasn't just going to fade away. No, this was the moment she would reclaim her life. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. She would show them all. No one, least of all Jason, could erase who she was. Dolores had always been a woman of routine. It was easier that way, keeping to the familiar, knowing what each day would bring. But even in her quiet moments of solitude, the weight of the past lingered like an uninvited guest at the dinner table. There was no escaping it. She'd often find herself in the evenings, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, settling into the same rocking chair by the window. It was a place of refuge, where the golden light softened the harsh lines of the room and filled it with a warmth that seemed to offer solace. The rocking chair had been with her for years, passed down through generations, creaking gently under her weight, as if it too carried the memories of a different time. Back then, it had been a symbol of care, of motherhood. She would rock Jason to sleep, humming soft lullabies that now felt like distant echoes. She would press her cheek to his, feeling the warmth of his small body, wondering what kind of man he would become. She never imagined the day would come when she would sit here alone, the silence louder than any lullaby she had sung. Jason had been her world, the world she had built with her hands piece by piece. She had sacrificed so much for him, her time, her dreams, her very sense of self. In those early days, she had been willing to give everything. Every dollar she earned was for him. Every moment of exhaustion, every tear she wiped away, every sleepless night was because of him. She had never expected anything in return, only the hope that one day he would remember all the little things she did for him. But the truth had come crashing down when Jason's love turned into a duty and then a burden. She had watched him grow, and with every year that passed, she had felt herself slipping further away from him. It had been subtle at first. He'd become absorbed in school, then work, then his own life. She had told herself it was just part of growing up. But as the years went on, those small things had accumulated. Forgotten calls, empty promises, and the silence that had begun to stretch between them. And then the day came when he had made his decision. When Jason told her that she needed to go to the nursing home, Dolores had been blindsided. It hadn't been a conversation, it had been a declaration. There had been no please or let's talk about it. Just cold, rehearsed words that had cut deeper than anything he could have said. He had painted it as a gift, a way to ensure she would be taken care of. But Dolores had seen through the thin veil of politeness. It wasn't about care. It was about convenience. He and Danielle were building their own life, and in that life, there was no room for her. The pain of that moment had sunk deep into her bones, an ache that had never quite gone away. The worst part wasn't the institution itself, though it had been everything she had feared. Sterile, impersonal, and suffocating. It was the realization that Jason had made the decision without a second thought. He hadn't even asked if she wanted to go. He hadn't asked if she was happy. He hadn't cared. At first, Dolores had fought it. She'd begged, pleaded even. But her words had bounced off him like raindrops on a window. And so she had gone, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. That was when Dolores's world had begun to change. In the quiet, sterile halls of the nursing home, Dolores had learned to survive. She had learned how to live without love, without connection. But in the depths of that loneliness, she had also found something she hadn't expected: herself. It wasn't freedom, not exactly, but it was space. Space to breathe, to think, to heal in ways she hadn't been able to before. And it was in this space that Dolores began to rebuild. When Tyler had come to visit her, his small hands clutching a crayon-drawn picture, something in her had shifted. He reminded her of the mother she used to be, before everything had crumbled. She had been that young woman once, full of hope and dreams, holding her baby in her arms and thinking that the love she gave would somehow be returned. But life had taught her differently. As she looked out the window now, with the golden light of the evening pouring through, Dolores could feel a quiet revolution stirring within her. She wasn't going to remain a prisoner to her son's decisions. She had reclaimed herself once already, and now it was time to reclaim her life, piece by piece, until she was whole again. But it wouldn't be easy. There was still a wall between her and Jason, one that had been built brick by brick over the years, his neglect, his coldness, his indifference. And though she longed for the closeness they once shared, she wasn't sure if it was even possible to mend what had been broken. Yet, in telling Tyler her story, she had felt something inside her stir, a stirring of strength, of purpose. She had been erased from Jason's life, but she had not been erased from the world. She would make sure of it. "I didn't fight back out of anger, Tyler," she had said, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling inside her. "I fought because I deserved better. And when someone doesn't see you, when they don't treat you with the respect you deserve, you have to remind them. You have to remind yourself." Dolores's thoughts swirled back to Jason. She had never wanted to be an obstacle in his life, but he had made her one. His absence in her life now felt as palpable as the chair beneath her, the air in the room thick with the tension she could no longer avoid. How could she have given everything to him and ended up here, alone, discarded, forgotten? But there was one thing Dolores knew for sure. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. Dolores Mayfield's life had once been marked by certainty, by a belief that love and hard work could overcome anything. When she was young, she had imagined a future filled with shared dreams, laughter, and the promise of family. But those dreams had crumbled in a way she never could have expected. She remembered a time when she had felt invincible. When she had first met William, Jason's father, there had been nothing but hope in her heart. It had been easy to fall in love back then, easy to dream of a life together, easy to believe that their love would be enough to weather any storm. But life, as it often did, had its own plans. William disappeared when Jason was still a baby. There had been no warning, no explanation, just an empty space where a future had once existed. Dolores had been left alone, with a child to raise and no idea how to make it work. But she did. And she did it with the fierce determination that came from the belief that she could create a better future for Jason than the one she had been given. She worked tirelessly, cleaning houses, serving late-night shifts at diners, picking up every odd job that came her way. The hours were long, the pay was meager, but she didn't mind. All that mattered was that Jason had what he needed. She had spent years working for him, making sure he never went without, always putting him first, always believing that one day he would understand the sacrifices she had made. And for a while, it seemed to work. She remembered the moments when Jason was young and how his face would light up when he saw her, how he would run to her after a long day, as if he could never get enough of her love. She held on to those moments like lifelines, convinced that they were proof that all of her sacrifices were worth it. But as Jason grew older, those moments became fewer. The distance between them began to grow in ways she couldn't explain at first. It was the little things, the missed birthdays, the forgotten phone calls, the way he began to prioritize everything but her. Dolores didn't take it personally at first. She chalked it up to his age, to the natural distance that came with growing up. But as the years passed, the silence between them grew louder, and she could no longer ignore the fact that Jason had outgrown her. She had believed, perhaps naively, that the bond between mother and child was unbreakable, but Jason's increasing distance had shattered that illusion. When he married Danielle, Dolores had tried to bury her sadness beneath a facade of happiness for him, but it was hard. He had moved on, creating a life that no longer included her, and that hurt more than anything. She didn't just miss him. She mourned the relationship that had once been the center of her world. And then, when Jason made the decision to place her in a nursing home, that pain turned into something else. It was a quiet betrayal, wrapped in the soft words of concern, the feigned sweetness of, "It's for your own good, Mom." Jason had said it so many times, his voice a rehearsed melody, but Dolores saw through it. She saw the truth in his eyes, the same indifference that had been building for years. To him, she wasn't his mother anymore. She was a problem, a burden, and he had simply removed her from his life. That was the moment everything had changed for Dolores. She was no longer the loving mother who had sacrificed everything. She had become an inconvenience. But what Jason didn't know, what he never understood, was that Dolores was not a woman who could simply fade away. She would not be discarded like an old photograph. She wasn't finished yet. The nursing home had been the hardest part of her life. The walls had been sterile, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and regret. The meals were cold, the faces around her were strangers, and the loneliness had been suffocating. But in that suffocating loneliness, Dolores had found something she had lost long ago: herself. In the quiet corners of her life, Dolores began to rebuild. She didn't know where to start at first, but she had time now. And time, for once, was on her side. She had always been strong, had always found ways to keep going, even when it felt like the world was working against her. Now she would need that strength more than ever. She started small. She began reading books on law, something that had always intrigued her but never seemed practical before. She pored over legal texts, reading everything she could get her hands on. She reached out to old friends who might know someone who could help. Slowly, she pieced together a plan. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the loneliness crept in and made her question if it was worth it. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the years she had spent working for Jason, giving up her own dreams to build his future. She would not let him take that from her. She would not let him erase her. And so, with the help of Monica Reeves, an old lawyer she had trusted years ago, Dolores began the long process of regaining control. She fought back against the power of attorney Jason had taken from her, knowing that it would be a difficult and long battle. But Dolores wasn't one to back down. She had been pushed to the edge, but she wasn't broken. Slowly, with every piece of paper signed, every phone call made, and every step she took toward reclaiming her independence, she was beginning to rewrite her story. Dolores had spent years living in the shadows of her son's life. But now she was stepping back into the light. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but it was hers. She wasn't done. And she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Jason, define who she was anymore. As Dolores's battle unfolded, she didn't just fight for her independence. She fought for her dignity. Every step she took was a defiance of the life Jason had tried to force on her. With each victory, she grew stronger, more determined. Her quiet rebellion was in full motion, and no one, not even Jason, could predict what was coming next. Dolores spent hours each day reading legal documents, studying the law with an intensity she had never known before. At first, it had felt overwhelming, an entire world she was unfamiliar with. But with every page, with every note she made, she grew more confident. She wasn't just fighting for her rights anymore. She was fighting for her dignity, her very existence. Monica Reeves, the lawyer who had agreed to help her, was nothing short of a godsend. A woman in her late 40s, Monica had a sharp mind and a kindness that had never once made Dolores feel like a burden. They met regularly, going over the details of Dolores's case, strategizing ways to regain control of her life. It was slow progress, but progress nonetheless. "Don't let them think you've given up," Monica said one afternoon, looking up from the stack of papers she had been reviewing. "You're stronger than they think." Dolores smiled weakly. The weight of what she had to do was never far from her mind, but she was determined to prove that she wasn't just the old woman Jason had discarded. She wasn't weak or helpless. She was a force to be reckoned with. As weeks passed, Dolores's confidence grew. She filed motions to revoke the power of attorney Jason had taken from her without her consent. She reviewed her financial documents, ensuring that every penny was accounted for. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control again, like she was the one calling the shots. And for every small victory, there was a quiet satisfaction that filled the spaces where sadness once resided. But there were moments of doubt. As the legal battles grew more intense, Dolores had to face the truth. Jason would not go down without a fight. She had known, deep down, that he would never let go of the control he had over her so easily. He would push back and push hard. One afternoon, Jason called. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this." Jason's voice echoed through the phone, strained with frustration. "I'm just trying to help you. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be." Dolores's heart clenched at the sound of his voice. It was the same voice she had heard 1,000 times, the voice of the son she had raised, the one she had poured all her love into. But this time she wasn't swayed. She had heard this line of reasoning before. She had heard the pity, the guilt. She wasn't going to fall for it again. "Help?" Dolores repeated quietly, her voice steady. "You think putting me in a nursing home is helping me?" There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Mom, it's not like that. Danielle and I just think—" "No," Dolores interrupted, her voice firm. "I don't need you to decide what's best for me. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions. I've spent my life making sacrifices for you, Jason. I'm not going to let you take my life away from me now." There was a long pause before Jason spoke again, his voice cold. "You're making a mistake, Mom. You'll regret this." Dolores took a deep breath, holding on to her calm. "I don't think so, Jason. This is my decision, and I'm taking back what's mine." She hung up the phone with a sense of finality that reverberated through her. The air felt different now, as though the weight of 1,000 unspoken words had been lifted. Dolores knew that Jason wouldn't give up without a fight, but she was ready for whatever came next. Days passed, and the legal battles continued. Monica's office became a second home for Dolores, as they strategized and worked through the finer details of the case. She kept a quiet confidence, never showing her hand too early. She knew Jason had underestimated her, but he would soon learn that Dolores Mayfield was not the woman he thought she was. At the same time, Dolores started making plans for her future. She wasn't going to spend the rest of her life in the sterile walls of a nursing home, under the watchful eyes of strangers. No, she would have her own life. She would be free. Monica had advised her to stay low, to let the legal process unfold naturally. But Dolores was far from idle. She started looking for a place of her own. Her small house, the one she had lived in for decades, was filled with memories of better times. But it wasn't enough anymore. She needed something new, something that represented the life she was building for herself. And so, Dolores bought a house. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. A small cottage, not far from Jason's own home, just enough space for her to live independently and regain her sense of freedom. The thought of living without the constant reminder of Jason's betrayal filled her with a quiet joy. It wasn't the grand life she had once dreamed of, but it was hers. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch of her new house, watching the world around her. The sunsets were beautiful, more vibrant here than in her old home. And as she watched the sky shift from orange to purple, Dolores felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. But peace didn't mean she had forgotten. Jason hadn't given up yet. He would come around, and when he did, Dolores would be ready. The day Jason finally showed up at her door, Dolores was ready. She had been expecting him, of course. He had been silent for weeks, but Dolores knew he couldn't stay away forever. And when he knocked on her door, his face was a mixture of frustration and concern, his usual demeanor when he couldn't control a situation. "Mom," Jason said, his voice tight with restrained anger. "This has gone far enough." Dolores stood in the doorway, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. "What has gone too far, Jason? Me taking control of my own life?" He shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't you?" "Oh, but it is me," Dolores replied, her voice calm and steady. "This is the woman I've always been. The woman who fought for you, who sacrificed everything for you, and who won't be erased by anyone, not even you." Jason's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I don't know what happened to you, Mom. You used to be different. You used to let me take care of things." "And you used to be my son," Dolores replied sharply, the words landing heavy in the air. "But somewhere along the way you forgot what that meant. You forgot what I gave up for you. And now, you think I'm the one who's wrong?" Jason opened his mouth to speak, but Dolores held up her hand, silencing him. "I'm done, Jason," she said quietly. "Done being your problem. I'm not going to fight you anymore. This is my life, and I'm living it." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their years of silence finally breaking. Jason's face twisted in anger, but Dolores stood her ground. She had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to move forward, to live the life she had always deserved. And in that moment, as Jason turned away and walked off her porch, Dolores felt the last of the chains that had bound her to him fall away. The door clicked shut behind Jason, leaving Dolores standing on her porch, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. She didn't know if Jason would ever truly understand the depths of her choices, but that was no longer her concern. The woman who stood on that porch was no longer the woman who had once allowed herself to be defined by others. She was her own person now, unshackled from the past, free to live on her own terms. As the days passed, Dolores settled into her new life with a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She was no longer simply existing, she was living. The small cottage she had purchased, not far from Jason's home, became a sanctuary. The space was hers to shape as she wished, and she filled it with the warmth of her memories and the strength of her present resolve. It wasn't much, but it was everything. She spent mornings tending to a modest garden, planting flowers and vegetables she'd always wanted to grow. The afternoons were hers to fill with reading, writing letters to old friends, and sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was simple, but it was her life, and it was enough. But Dolores wasn't content with simply finding peace for herself. She knew that her journey had to mean something more. As the days wore on, she found herself reflecting on the women she had met during her time in the nursing home. Women who, like her, had been cast aside by their families, forgotten, left behind. Dolores couldn't let that continue. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch with a mug of tea, the idea came to her. She would establish a trust, a fund that would provide support for older women who had been abandoned by their families. Women who had been discarded like yesterday's news. It would be a lifeline for them, just as Dolores had fought to create one for herself. The thought filled her with purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had ever been overlooked, forgotten, or pushed aside because of her age. She had the resources now, and she knew that she could make a real difference. Dolores reached out to Monica, the lawyer who had helped her, and together they began drafting the legal documents to establish the trust. It took time, but with each meeting, Dolores felt the weight of her past losses shift. She was building something that would outlast her, something that would continue to help others long after she was gone. And so, with each passing day, Dolores's life transformed. Her legacy was no longer tied to the sacrifices she had made for her son. It was tied to the women she helped, to the lives she touched, to the quiet strength she had found within herself. Word began to spread about Dolores's work. At first it was small. A few women from the community approached her, asking about her trust and the help it could provide. Dolores welcomed them into her home, listening to their stories, offering advice, and providing whatever assistance she could. Soon, word spread further, and Dolores found herself at the center of a small but growing movement. Women came to her for help, not just with legal matters, but with advice on how to regain their independence, how to take back control of their lives. Dolores wasn't just a woman who had overcome a personal betrayal. She had become a symbol of hope and strength for those who had been left behind. One woman, Carol, came to Dolores after her children had placed her in a nursing home without her consent. She had heard about the trust and had hoped Dolores might help her. Carol's eyes were filled with the same fear Dolores had once known, the fear of being forgotten, of being invisible. Dolores listened to Carol's story with empathy, then took her hand, her voice steady. "You're not alone," Dolores said softly. "We'll fight this." "You deserve to be seen." The work was slow, the process often frustrating. But with every small victory, Dolores grew more confident in her mission. The trust began to take shape, offering financial support to women who needed legal representation, housing assistance, and access to health care. More than just financial aid, Dolores provided a sense of dignity and purpose for those who had been discarded. Jason's visits became less frequent. He stopped by once or twice after the confrontation, but they were brief, awkward, and filled with unsaid words. Dolores knew he was struggling to accept the reality that she was no longer the woman he could control. There had been no apology, no acknowledgement of the hurt he had caused. Instead, there was just silence. And Dolores had come to terms with it. She didn't need Jason's approval anymore. She had long since stopped seeking his validation. The woman who had once lived in the shadow of her son was no longer willing to be a part of his world. She had her own world now, one she had created on her own terms. One day, months after the confrontation, Jason showed up on her doorstep again. This time, Dolores didn't hesitate. She opened the door, but she didn't invite him in. She didn't need to. "Mom," Jason began, his voice quieter than before, "I know things between us have been difficult. I've thought a lot about what you said, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can." Dolores regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. She saw the guilt there, the confusion, but it wasn't enough. "You can't fix it, Jason," Dolores replied softly. "The damage is done, but I've come to accept that. I've moved on." She paused, her gaze steady. "I want you to know that I'm not angry. I'm just done. I've rebuilt my life. And I've learned something important. I am not defined by you. I am not defined by what you think of me. I'm free now, and I plan to stay that way." Jason's expression faltered, but Dolores didn't wait for him to respond. She stepped back, closing the door gently but firmly. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation that some might have expected. It was the quiet resolution of a woman who had fought for her own peace and had won. Dolores's life continued to evolve, not just as a survivor of betrayal, but as a champion for others. Her trust grew, and the lives she touched were countless. She mentored women, helped them rebuild their lives, and empowered them to reclaim their voices. In the small town where she had once been overlooked, Dolores became a beloved figure, a symbol of strength, resilience, and the quiet power of standing up for yourself. One evening, as Dolores sat on the porch of her cottage, Tyler came to visit. He was older now, a young man full of questions and ideas. He sat beside her, his eyes reflecting the wisdom he had inherited from his grandmother. "Grandma," Tyler said thoughtfully, "you've done so much for so many people. You've made a real difference." Dolores smiled, her heart full. "I did what I had to do, Tyler, but more than that, I lived for myself. I want you to remember that. No matter what life throws at you, never let anyone take away your voice. You are the one who decides who you are." Tyler nodded, his expression serious but full of respect. "I will, Grandma. I promise." As the sun set over the horizon, Dolores felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had fought for her life, for her dignity, and for the women who had been silenced. And now she could rest easy, knowing that her legacy would live on through the countless lives she had touched. Her story was one of resilience, of standing up in the face of adversity, and of reclaiming the power to live fully, to speak your truth, and to never let anyone define your worth. After the confrontation with Jason, Dolores didn't just retreat into solitude. Her mission had changed. It was no longer about seeking revenge or reclaiming her independence. It was about creating a lasting impact on the world around her. Her trust for older women was taking shape, and she found herself connected to women across the town, women who, like her, had been silenced. But her mission was far from complete. There was more work to do. One evening, after a long day spent working with a local group of women, Dolores sat down to reflect on everything she had accomplished so far. Her thoughts meandered through the memories of her past, the betrayals, the heartaches, and the moments of joy that now seemed so far behind her. The weight of it all sometimes threatened to pull her under, but Dolores had learned long ago how to swim against the current. Her newfound purpose had begun to spill into every part of her life. She started holding monthly meetings at her house, bringing together older women who had been neglected by their families, giving them a place to share their experiences. Some came in quiet, unwilling to speak at first, afraid of being dismissed. But over time, as the group grew, Dolores watched them come alive, sharing stories and offering support to one another. Through these meetings, she met Clara, a woman in her early 70s who had been abandoned by her children after a series of unfortunate events left her financially dependent on them. Her story was one of neglect, of growing up in a harsh world where every decision was made for her, not by her. At first, Clara had been hesitant to join the group. She didn't believe anyone could help her. "I'm too old for this," she would mutter, shaking her head. But Dolores saw something in Clara, something familiar. Dolores had once felt that way too. She knew that all it took was one spark to ignite the fire of confidence. One day, after several weeks of watching Clara grow more comfortable with the group, Dolores took her aside. "Clara, there's something I see in you," Dolores said, her voice soft but insistent. "You've lived a long life, and you've learned more than you think. But you've been quiet for too long. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to stand up for yourself." Clara's eyes welled with tears, but Dolores wasn't looking for pity. She wasn't offering charity. She was offering Clara the chance to find her voice. With Dolores's encouragement, Clara took a bold step. She began to speak at the meetings. At first, it was small, little comments here and there, a story or two about her life. But soon enough, Clara had built up the courage to make her voice heard. And Dolores watched in awe as Clara, just like her, began to reclaim her life. As Dolores's trust began to make waves in the community, she encountered some unexpected allies, those who, despite having no direct ties to her struggle, wanted to help. One of them was Monica Reeves, her lawyer. Monica had always admired Dolores's resilience, but as she worked with her on the trust, she realized just how much she could learn from the older woman. Monica, in her late 40s, had been through her own struggles. Her career had taken precedence over her family life, and she had never truly understood what it meant to make personal sacrifices until she started working with Dolores. It wasn't just legal paperwork that tied them together anymore. It was a shared commitment to fighting for the rights of women. One afternoon, Monica sat with Dolores in the small kitchen of the cottage, sipping tea. "You've done more than just reclaim your life," Monica said, her voice filled with awe. "You've given others the courage to do the same. That's extraordinary." Dolores smiled, though there was a weariness in her eyes. "I'm not extraordinary. I'm just a woman who learned how to stand up for herself." Monica looked at her with respect. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe we could take this further. The trust, the work you're doing, it's a start. But what if we could get local organizations to help fund this? There's so much more we could do if we had more resources." Dolores raised an eyebrow. She wasn't one to chase after grand gestures. But the more she thought about it, the more it seemed possible. What if she could build something bigger? Something that could truly change the landscape for women who had been forgotten? Together, they began to reach out to local foundations, churches, and businesses. It was a long, arduous process, but slowly, they built partnerships. Monica's legal expertise and Dolores's personal touch were a formidable combination. The first grant they received was small, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. Dolores knew this was just the beginning, and she was ready to fight for more. The trust that Dolores had established continued to grow, with more women joining the cause and more resources coming in. She had built a small but mighty organization, and with each passing day, the impact grew larger. She didn't just offer financial support. She brought women together, creating a sense of community and solidarity that had been missing from their lives. Some women found housing, others found legal representation, and many found the strength to leave toxic situations they had once thought they couldn't escape. Dolores's life had become a testament to resilience. She was no longer the quiet woman who had been abandoned by her family. She was a force, a leader, and a voice for women who had no one else to speak for them. But as her success grew, so did the challenges. People from all walks of life began to notice what Dolores was doing, and while many supported her efforts, others sought to undermine her. Local politicians, business leaders, and even some family members who had previously ignored her began to show interest, either to help or to capitalize on her work. One of these people was Valerie, a local politician who saw an opportunity to ride the wave of Dolores's growing influence. She approached Dolores one afternoon, her smile sharp and calculating. "You've done well for yourself, Dolores," Valerie said, her voice smooth. "But I'm thinking it's time for you to take this to the next level. We could work together, get you some real backing. I'm sure you'd appreciate the resources I could offer." Dolores knew immediately what Valerie was up to. It wasn't about supporting women. It was about making a name for herself. "No, thank you," Dolores replied, her voice unwavering. "I didn't fight this battle to hand over control to anyone else." Valerie's smile faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Suit yourself. But remember, you can't do it alone forever." As Valerie walked away, Dolores felt the weight of the words. It was true. She couldn't do it alone forever. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let anyone take what she had built. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the women who had found their voices because of her. It was about the legacy she was creating. Years passed, and Dolores continued her work. The trust expanded, and more women were empowered to take charge of their own lives. Dolores found that she was no longer just helping women reclaim their voices. She was creating a space where they could mentor others, offering guidance and support in ways that she had never imagined. One afternoon, as Dolores walked through the community center, she noticed a young woman, no more than 25, talking to a group of older women. She was speaking with the same passion Dolores had once had when she first began this journey, passionate, fearless, and full of determination. Dolores watched quietly for a moment, then approached her. "Your name is Samantha, isn't it?" Dolores asked. The young woman looked up and smiled. "Yes, you're Dolores, aren't you? I've heard so much about you." Dolores chuckled softly. "I'm sure you have. But I'm not the only one making a difference around here." "What are you doing?" Samantha paused, then spoke with a sincerity that reminded Dolores of herself. "I'm trying to help these women, just like you helped me. I want to give them a place to belong, a place where they don't feel invisible. You gave me that." Dolores smiled, her heart full. "You're already doing it, Samantha. Keep going. Just remember, you don't have to do it alone." Samantha nodded, her eyes bright with hope. Dolores knew that this was the future. Her legacy wasn't just about the work she had done, it was about passing the torch to the next generation. As Dolores walked away, she felt a quiet peace settle in her heart. She had fought for herself. She had fought for others. And now she could rest easy knowing that her story would live on, carried forward by the very women she had helped. As the trust continued to grow, Dolores found herself more deeply entrenched in the lives of the women she was helping. She became a symbol not just of personal strength, but of community resilience. Women who had once been discarded, forgotten, now turned to her for guidance, support, and a reminder that their voices mattered. Dolores was no longer merely a survivor. She had become a beacon of hope for those who had no one else to turn to. One of the most profound moments in Dolores's journey came when she received a letter from Clara, the first woman she had mentored so many years ago. Clara had been struggling in silence, but Dolores's encouragement had sparked a quiet revolution within her. In the letter, Clara thanked Dolores for giving her the courage to stand up to her own children who had abandoned her just as Jason had once abandoned Dolores. "I didn't know how to fight for myself," Clara wrote. "But you showed me that I didn't need to fight alone. I've found my voice, Dolores. And now, I'm helping others do the same." The letter was brief, but it left Dolores with a profound sense of fulfillment. Her work was changing lives, one small victory at a time, but it was also teaching her something she hadn't expected. By giving others the strength to stand up for themselves, she had given herself the strength to do the same. Dolores's heart swelled with pride. She wasn't just healing from her own wounds anymore. She was healing others, helping them rebuild their lives from the ground up. The ripple effect of her actions was far-reaching. It was a legacy that would live on in the women who had found their voices through her work. Despite the success of her efforts, there was still a piece of Dolores's heart that hadn't healed completely. The relationship with her son, Jason. She had long since accepted that she couldn't change the past, but there was a part of her that hoped, someday, Jason would come to understand the full extent of her strength, of her decision to stand up for herself. And so, one evening, several years after their last confrontation, Dolores received an unexpected visitor. Jason showed up on her doorstep, looking older, tired, and less confident than the man who had once brushed her off as a burden. "Mom," Jason began, his voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" Dolores stood in the doorway, studying him for a moment. She had heard nothing from him in months, and yet here he was. Part of her was hesitant, unsure whether opening the door would open old wounds. But another part of her, the part that had spent years fighting for her voice, knew that it was time to speak her truth. "Come in." "Jason," Dolores said quietly, stepping aside to let him through. They sat together at the small kitchen table, the silence between them thick with years of unsaid words. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands wringing together. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Jason finally said, looking down at his hands. "About how I treated you, how I just pushed you away." Dolores listened without interrupting, letting him speak. She could feel the weight of his guilt, but she also knew that words weren't enough. She had waited for this moment, but it didn't mean she was ready to forgive him, not just yet. "I was wrong," Jason continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I know that now, and I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to start by understanding you, by understanding what you've done. I see now that I never really saw you. Not as a person, not as a mother, just as someone I could take care of, or push aside when I didn't need you." Dolores's heart tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "It's not about you fixing it, Jason. It's about you understanding that I had to fight for myself. I had to stand up for myself. And I didn't do that just for me. I did it for every woman who's ever been discarded, who's ever been told she's not worth fighting for." Jason nodded slowly, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to be a better son. I want to be there for you, like I should have been all along." Dolores studied him for a long time, weighing his words. She didn't need to hear the words of apology, but it was a start. Maybe this was the first step in rebuilding their relationship, not to go back to what they had been, but to move forward with a new understanding. "I'm not asking for perfection, Jason," Dolores said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I'm asking for respect. For you to see me, to see that I'm not just your mother. I'm Dolores. I'm a woman with my own life, and I've worked hard to build it. I'm not asking you to be perfect, but I am asking for you to stand beside me, not above me." Jason reached out to her, his hand trembling slightly. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try." Dolores nodded, her heart still heavy, but lighter than it had been in years. We'll take it one day at a time. That's all we can do. As the weeks passed, Jason and Dolores began to rebuild their relationship, cautiously and with effort. It was never going to be the same as it once was, but there was hope. Hope that they could learn to see each other, not as roles in a family, but as individuals. Dolores's work continued to flourish. She watched as the trust she had created expanded, as women who had once been invisible found their voices. The community that had once overlooked her now relied on her. And in that, Dolores found the peace she had sought for so long. One day, as Dolores walked through the community center, she was approached by one of the women she had mentored, a woman named Sarah who had turned her life around with the help of the trust. Sarah's eyes were bright, and there was a confidence in her posture that Dolores hadn't seen when they first met. "Dolores, I just wanted to say thank you," Sarah said, her voice full of gratitude. "I'm not just rebuilding my life. I'm helping other women do the same. I know I wouldn't be here without you." Dolores smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "It's not me, Sarah, it's you. You found the strength to change your life. I just showed you where to look." As Sarah walked away, Dolores felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was her legacy, not just a fund or a trust, but a movement that was alive and growing. Later that evening, Dolores sat with Tyler, now a young man, at her kitchen table. He had grown so much, and Dolores couldn't help but feel that she had done something right. She had taught him not just how to survive, but how to thrive. "Grandma," Tyler said quietly, his voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking about everything you've done, and I want to do something like that too. I want to help people the way you've helped them." Dolores smiled, her heart full. "You already are, Tyler. You already are." As the sun set outside her window, Dolores sat back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. The journey had been long and it had been hard, but she had made it. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her voice, and that, Dolores knew, was more than enough. The seasons had changed, and the town, once quiet and distant, had become a place of connection. The community center, once a neglected building, was now buzzing with activity, women supporting one another, sharing stories, and finding strength in the bond they had created together. Dolores's legacy had flourished, not just as an idea or a trust, but as a living, breathing movement that continued to ripple outwards, far beyond what she had ever imagined. Dolores sat on the porch of her cottage one evening, a contented smile on her face as she gazed at the horizon. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange, and the world felt still, as though time had paused to honor everything she had fought for. She wasn't looking back at the life she had left behind in the past. She wasn't focused on what had been taken from her. She was looking at the present, the life she had built, the lives she had touched, and the future that was still unfolding. Her thoughts drifted to her son, Jason. Their relationship was still fragile, still healing, but it had grown stronger than it had been in years. He visited often now, sometimes bringing his wife, Danielle, and their children. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. There were no illusions between them anymore. They had learned to be family, not by pretending that everything was as it once was, but by acknowledging what had happened and accepting each other in spite of it. Jason had started to understand, in his own way, what Dolores had fought for, not just her independence, but her dignity. Dolores had spent so many years feeling invisible, feeling like she was a burden. But now, with the work she had done, she knew what it meant to be seen, to be valued. And that had made all the difference. The soft clink of the screen door behind her drew her attention. Tyler stood in the doorway, looking more like a young man than the boy she had once watched grow. His face was full of purpose, his eyes bright with ideas and dreams of his own. "Grandma, can I talk to you?" Tyler asked, his voice steady but filled with the same seriousness that had once been her own. Dolores motioned for him to sit next to her on the porch. "Of course, Tyler. What's on your mind?" Tyler sat down, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done. You've made such a difference in so many lives. In my life. I want to do something too. Something that honors everything you've worked for." Dolores turned toward him, her heart swelling with pride. Tyler had always been perceptive, but now he was growing into his own. He had inherited her resilience, her quiet strength, and her ability to see the potential in others. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice gentle but encouraging. "I want to work with young people," Tyler said, his voice full of conviction. "Especially those who are in tough situations, families who don't understand them, kids who are overlooked or forgotten. I think I could help them the way you helped those women. I want to make sure they don't feel invisible, that they know they matter." Dolores smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. It was the kind of answer she had hoped for, but never expected so soon. Tyler had seen, had understood, everything she had taught him, not just about standing up for yourself, but about standing for others, lifting them up. "Tyler, that's a beautiful idea," Dolores said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You have more than enough in you to make a difference. Just remember, the real work is never easy, but you've seen how much it matters." Tyler nodded, determination in his eyes. "I won't forget what you've taught me, Grandma. I want to carry it forward, to make sure no one has to fight alone." Dolores reached out and took his hand in hers. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. She had done her part, but now, as she looked at Tyler, she realized the next chapter was already beginning. Her work had laid the foundation, but the future would be shaped by the next generation. She didn't need to worry anymore. She had given everything she could, and now, it was time for the younger generation to carry the torch forward. Tyler stood, offering his hand to her. "Come on, Grandma. I think we should take a walk." "You've done enough sitting on this porch." Dolores laughed softly, grateful for his company. She took his hand and allowed him to help her to her feet. Together they walked down the path from the cottage, the sun slowly sinking behind them, casting long shadows that stretched toward the horizon. As they walked side by side, Dolores knew she had done what she set out to do. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and most importantly, her voice. She had helped countless others find their own, and she had made sure they would never feel invisible again. And now, as she looked at Tyler walking beside her, the future felt bright. He would carry on her work. He would carry on the fight for those who had been silenced, for those who needed someone to stand for them. She wasn't alone. She never had been, and she would never be forgotten. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, Dolores Mayfield walked forward into the night, knowing that her story wasn't just her own. It was the story of every woman who had ever been told she was too old, too weak, too invisible to matter. But she had proved them all wrong. And in the end, that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.